our lovely Kate McKeown. Kate McKeown also from Musical Theatre Network and MMD, and Natalia Scorer from MMD sent her apologies. She's overseas at the moment this week on some much needed annual leave, but otherwise would be here joining us as well, as this is both an MTN and MMD event. Every year we try to have at least one event that's focused on musical theatre and environmental sustainability. As many of you know, it's one of the Arts Council's investment principles, which is good. It's a key focus point for all Arts Council England funded organisations. But quite apart from that, we know that this is a subject that is more and more important as time goes by, and one that we hope to not just address directly, but for it to be a consideration, a lens that we look at every other subject in musical theatre through as well. And that it's an all pervasive concern for all of us, I know, probably that are in this call. And in the past, we've had these discussions looking at both the creative side of the conversation and the practical considerations, such as working with Judy's Bicycle, looking at carbon footprints, looking at sustainable touring and so on. But the creative side of those conversations has often been the more musical theatre specific in the past. So we thought this time round we would focus the conversation on the creative side. We all know that musical theatre has certain possibilities of changing hearts and minds. You look at the history of musical theatre and how often many of those classic musicals have had a sort of social change agenda to them, and how effective the musical theatre form can be. We all know this at sneaking in emotions that people may not have expected to have until suddenly they're feeling them, feeling all the feels during a song that can, in a way, there's all that scientific research, isn't there, about how the actual effect of theatre, and particularly musical theatre, can transform the way an audience feels, that collective response to something. And there's something about that collective emotion that a really great musical theatre song can stir up, that hopefully can affect even the more cynical people, perhaps at the start of a show, around some of the issues around adjustments that can be made to do with climate change. So we thought there's lots that can be discussed about how musical theatre can best be positioned, and the content of musical theatre can best address climate change and adjustments that people can make. So we're going to talk a bit more on that side of things today. Before handing you over to Will, just one thing I wanted to say by way of a provocation for myself from MTN was that I was very lucky to go to the Venice Architecture Biennale earlier this year, which and traveling entirely by train, I hasten to add, all the way there and back. But it was a privilege to go to something that was an international collection of creative thinkers doing exhibits on the theme of the laboratory of the future. And because you had creative minds thinking about the future, what was really striking was that it seems almost every creative internationally, if they're thinking about the future, they're thinking about the climate crisis and about environmental sustainability. I would say about 70% at least of the exhibits were specifically about the climate crisis, and many of them were really striking in terms of the level of thinking, the collaboration with scientists that creatives were doing. And it really brought home to me that so many international creative thinkers are placing climate change and climate crisis at the center of their priorities. So it felt even more so. This is something that in the UK, I think creatives are engaging more and more with this area, but it feels like in musical theatre we've got a particular territory that we've got an opportunity to address. And I know many of you on this call are already doing that, so it'd be lovely to talk further about how you're approaching these large issues. So, but without further ado, over to Will to introduce himself.
Hello everyone. A very quick introduction, and then I just want to sort of say a few things very much related to and sort of building on what James just said, all of which I agree with really strongly. So that's a nice start. And then we'll hear from our provocateurs, some of the others, and we'll have a big group discussion and sort of see how we're doing with that. So I'm Will. I'm artistic director of Meta Theatre, one of two artists in Meta Theatre, and also sort of founder and runner of Meta Green, which is kind of an arm of Meta Theatre, which is specifically mostly focused on the sort of much more practical, how we can make our work and how we can help other people make their work more sustainably, more environmentally sustainably. But sort of throughout, which was something we founded and sort of started during the pandemic to build on work that we've been doing since we founded the company 15 years ago. And just sort of to put that out there and to use what we have figured out the hard way to help other people skip over some of the difficult bits in figuring it out. But sort of during the process of all of that, a sort of major realization is that while the practicalities are becoming more and more prominent and more thought about in the theatre world, there has been to date both not very much and certainly not very much successful sort of environmentally themed or work that sort of engages with the environment and these issues. Obviously there's been some, and obviously some of it has been great, but of course, you know, looking at the whole canon of work that is produced, quite a small part of it is related to our physical world, our environment. And I guess there was a sort of a moment of realization for me, and this really does start speaking to what James was just saying, that actually it's now not possible to make any artistic intervention or any sort of artistic thought that is not in some way connected to the state of the world that we live in. Just like it's not possible to make a piece of work that doesn't in some way have some connection to, you know, lots of the other sort of issues that are sort of going on. Every piece of artistic work is either a comment or a investigation or some way connected to the world in which we live, and the state of our planet is so severe, so major, so important, that actually that is part of the context for everything we do, even when we don't think it is. Even if we're, you know, reviving a very old piece of work that had nothing to, you know, that was written before any of this was important. You know, we might be doing a piece of Shakespeare, and you know, climate change wasn't an issue when that was being written, but it is an issue when it's being performed, and sort of rethought how to perform it and what it means to our current audience. And I guess I take that very broadly. I don't mean that everything is directly about it, but it is within the context of it. And I think that it's so important that we are conscious of that and that we think about how it is within that context, and we do it consciously and deliberately. We might choose not to focus on it in any, you know, we might choose for that not to be a prominent thing at all in a production, but to know that you've done that on purpose rather than accidentally, I think is really, really important. And I guess that's, I think I half wrote down what you said, James, that anybody who is thinking about the future is thinking in this sort of space, in these artistic spaces, they are thinking about the climate. They are thinking about the world that we live in, because actually if either you're thinking about it because you think nothing's going to change and we're all going to carry on living exactly how we do now and it's all going to be great, that is now a thought. That is a very deliberate, conscious thought in the way that it wasn't 100 years ago, 50 years ago. Or they're thinking that something is going to change. And that might mean that they think that there's a load of solutions that are going to come along and they're going to fix things, or they might think that there are not going to be a load of solutions come along and we're not going to fix things and we're going to have to deal with the fallout of all of that. But sort of any one of those options, they are now all choices. And it's not possible to think about the future without that. And I guess the way I would sort of frame that is, it's not really possible to make a piece of art without thinking about the future in some form, because that is what it is. It's either processing something now, or it's very consciously looking at the future, or it's processing something from the past. But the point of doing that is because we are going to carry on in that future. So I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over, but I guess I think that's such an important sort of aspect of what we're doing, but to be conscious of that and aware of it in the way we think about things is really important. They've done an amazing bit of work over the last few years at the Donmar warehouse. Zoe Svensson's climate dramaturg, which was an amazing job to exist and for somebody to be doing. And she did incredible work at looking at how, so they programmed the season of work, and they did not, I believe, deliberately make it all about the climate in any way. But then she was then looking at the work that they were doing anyway, and sort of noting how it was related in different ways. Remember her realizing that there were lots of themes in Henry V that related to sort of climate and the environment, sort of via ideas of colonialism and slavery and you know, sort of takes on the world that were sort of embodied in the writing and the situations, and sort of extrapolating that out and realizing what that means now. And I guess I think that way of looking at everything that we do is really, really important and a great sort of setup. Obviously, most theatres don't have that luxury of people dedicated to that role, but I think we can, you know, any little bits of that we can all do individually, especially as we're making new work. I think it's really brilliant. I think to pick up on that James said of sort of bringing even the most cynical audience members sort of along with us, people who aren't expecting, who haven't come for a social message or to do sort of thinking about bigger issues, that come for a lovely night out, which is bringing them along with us and thinking about the way that we're talking to them. I think I think it's fascinating and vitally important. That's why I think the arts are important, obviously. And I think that kind of storytelling and the way that we can do that with storytelling is what I particularly love about theatre. And music particularly, like as you say, it's so powerful, so such an emotional connection into issues that's really brilliant. I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet at the moment about the idea of how we can know things sort of intellectually. We can know things with our head, or we can know things with our heart. We can sort of intellectualize and conceptualize and think about things, or we can feel them. And I think that essentially, I think this is a major problem with the root of the major problem with why environmental action is just not happening at the rate and the scale that it needs to be happening at. Because we can think about things in our heads, we can say we understand the problems, we can read all the newspaper articles, we can think we've understood it all, and then every single time there's anything to be done, we can always sort of squirm our way out of having to do something, because there's always an intellectual argument for why something can be a bit different this time around. Whereas if you really feel the need for the changes and the problems and the what's happening and the sort of backdrop to all of that and the underlying issues of all of that, actually you can't sort of squirm your way out of things, intellectualize your way out of things, or argue your way out of things with your heart. It's like if you really feel it, you really feel it. And I think that's where the arts get to engage with this, or where it's really important that the arts engage with this issue of where we're at in the environment and in our world, and where that's going and what we want, how we want to address that. I think that's so important to help bring people into that sort of self and emotional sort of way of knowing, rather than just an intellectualized way of knowing. So that's a bit of an introduction to me, why I think it's important, why we sort of teamed up to do this and have this conversation. I think that's probably enough from me spouting now, keep pontificating now, but if we hear from sort of a quick introduction from each of our provocateurs about sort of the project that you've been working on and how you've been thinking about it. If we could try and stick to sort of 5 minutes each, I reckon, and I'll sort of try and gently nudge you along if we're sort of running on. That'll just give us lots of time for a wider conversation, and obviously there'll be lots of time within that for to add in other bits that anybody feels they didn't get to say in their 5 minutes. But it'd be lovely to make sure we've got lots of time for questions and wider conversation. So I'm just looking down my list to make sure I don't forget anyone. Aina, if you want to start us off, just going purely in the order of the list that Jen sent in his email the other day of who we have, that would be great.
Lovely. Hiya. My name is Gaynor Stiles, and I'm the Artistic Director of Theatr Na Nog in South Wales. It's fantastic to be here, and I was just so excited that this conversation was happening. So I'm really grateful for inviting me along. So the musical that I'm going to talk about now is actually, it doesn't sound like it's climate change at all, but, bear with. Okay, so it's basically called Operation Julie. It's a prog rock musical that tells the incredible story of the undercover police operation that smashed one of the most extraordinary LSD drug rings in the world has ever seen. Its creators were raising a flag saying the planet is in danger, and they believed LSD was a signpost leading the way to waking up humanity to the disaster ahead of us. Wow. Heads blown. do you want me to say anything else? Do you want me to talk a little bit more
Yeah,
about
do you want to, tell us a little bit more about it, and sort of particularly how you are sort of thinking about the environment and the world, sort of in the context of thinking about writing and making it?
Yeah, so interestingly, we've done a few musicals actually about climate change, that being the themes of it. But this, weirdly, with Operation Julie, it wasn't, when I first heard the story, I was just so, because it's a true story that happened in West Wales. I was just like, oh, I could do like an Ealing comedy-esque caper musical. That's what I was thinking of. But as I researched it, you know, the reason why these people came from city areas to live in West Wales, like they did down in the southwest, was to basically escape consumerism and to seek an alternative lifestyle. And once I started researching the chemist who created the purest form of LSD, Richard Kemp, it was so evident that the reasoning behind it, his philosophy, and like a lot of the people at that time in the 60s and 70s, was to find an alternative way of living. So it's sort of a little bit like The Good Life meets Breaking Bad, I suppose. And there is, when they were arrested, Richard Kemp had already prepared a thesis to read out in court, and his barrister told him, you know, you can't read that out. It's, you know, it's going to really, condemn you, basically. So he never read it out, but he actually sent it to a journalist in Aberystwyth, to the Cambrian News. And when I was doing the research, we found excerpts of it, and it's so prophetic. And this was written in 1978. And when the actor, the fantastic Joe Tweedale, I've got to give him a mention because he's an unbelievable actor, Musil. He reads this out again. And, you know, I was always nervous about this because it's like, it's such a lecture about what is going to happen to the planet if we don't start, you know, capitalizing from it. You know, this is what's going to happen. And it's very, very prophetic. You cannot, honest to God, it is like, you know, you cannot hear a pin drop in there. It's just incredible, that impact. They've gone for about an hour and a half. The audiences have gone through this prog rock festival theatre, you know, really ridiculous police undercover story. And then it's about this. This is why these people are here. This is why they've created this LSD. It's because they want to open people's minds. And when we hear this piece, it's done to the backdrop of, you know, he says things in it like, you know, that the politicians will lie. You know, we've got then excerpts of Boris in Parliament and things like that on the AV. The audience are completely with it. They are like, yes, we have to change. We have to change the way we see in this. It is so powerful. And I think it was never intended to be a climate musical, if you want to call it that. But because the story is so strong, and I think because one of the people that was involved in the original, the dealing of the drug back in West Wales, Smiles, his name is, you know, he said, we knew what was going to happen and we tried everything to change it. And we basically fucked it up. And it's important, I think, you know, when we're talking about this, it's really easy to be depressed about it all and to sort of go, hands in the air, let's forget it. It's too big a problem. But we have to have hope, because for the future generation, they can change it. So this musical for me is about getting younger people in, seeing this incredible, being part of this festival musical, but thinking, do you know what, we can change it. We can change the way we are seeing the world. You know, we cannot capitalize from this planet anymore. This greed for consume and just, you know, is just, it's we can't sustain it. It's unsustainable. And you can do that through like fantastic prog rock musical, you know, it's amazing music in the show, you know, got everything from Hawkwind to Moody Blues, you know, to great Welsh bands like Man, and it's just fantastic. But at its core is this, we've got to change the way we see the world and see the planet and how we're connected to it, you know, for our own survival. So, you know, I'm so, you know, I absolutely, obviously I love this show. I absolutely, but I love the impact it has on audiences, because I think what you were saying, you get them in on the prog rock you know, Operation Julie LSD drugs thing, but they leave knowing that they have to change the way they see the world. And that for me is everything, you know. So the more of these shows there are, it doesn't matter what it's about really, you know, as in, you know, it could be on any theme, you know. The environmental movement started in the Industrial Revolution, you know, it was at that time, you know, there were protests then, you know, so it can be set anywhere, and everything is open for us all, you know. And I think that, you know, for an element of creativity, you know, it holds no bounds really. So I'm excited and I'm hopeful. Yeah, so that's basically my little bit on it.
Amazing, thanks. I think that's really true, that sort of, you know, you can pick any story and think that you're making a show about that story, and then actually there's always like ways that connects into the way, you know, how and where we live. Like, that's what matters in the environmental thinking about things. It's like how and where we live, and whether we can, and, you know, finding alternatives to a system that is currently not working is absolutely fun. So, yeah, amazing. What an amazing story. Who's next on my order here? Lewis. Yes, tell us a bit about it.
Hello. So yes, hello, I'm Lewis. I am the writer of Harry and Greta, which was the New Musical Theatre Award winner for British Youth Music Theatre. That's a lot of words in one sentence. And we were on at the New Wolsey Theatre in Ipswich this summer. So yeah, basically Harry and Greta is a post-apocalyptic retelling of Hansel and Gretel. When I was putting together a pitch for BYMT, I knew that climate crisis and climate justice was something I wanted to explore, specifically because I was working with young people. And when I like to create something, I always want to think of what's going to be the most challenging thing to do. And sometimes for young people, climate justice can seem like quite a sort of a lofty and dusty subject, when actually it should be something that can be seen as more interactive, I think, and more like there's something you can actually do about it. So I knew that's what I wanted to do, but I had no idea how that was going to happen. And then when I was researching some of the Grimm fairy tales, and I came across Hansel and Gretel, I had no idea that the story was sort of influenced originally by this great famine in, I think, 1315, that kind of period, that came about because of these mass droughts. And I was sort of blown away by, actually, that is something that it seems so far away, but also sort of ever present in today's society. So I wanted to take that and see if we actually, instead of going to the past, we go to the future, and see what happens to the young people once they escape from the witch. And so the show is all about basically these young people being left completely alone by the parents, and rather than at first it's really easy to sort of go into crisis mode and chaos mode, and it's very Lord of the Fliesy. And then they realize throughout the show that actually they have the opportunity to create a world, and they can't go back on all the mistakes of the people before them. What they can do is do everything they can to make the most of the situation they're in now. And the show ends with a song very much called, what's it called? Who Are They? And it was really interesting actually seeing it performed, because obviously in the audience there was people from lots of different generations, but a lot of parents. We had 36 young people in the show, and a lot of parents were sat there. And there's a bit that the director would have in it. Basically, the parents are living on Mars at the end, because why not? And they are basically saying to the children, come to live with us on Mars. And there's this whole song saying, why should we? Who are you to tell us to be grateful? And who are you to tell us when it's time? And what we had is the young people were pointing at the audience as well, which I didn't know if that would work or not, if it would feel too on the nose. But actually, after they've sort of sat with the young people for the whole time, and then finally they're breaking the fourth wall, actually it was really effective. So yeah, we tried to have I did a lot of reading, and I actually tried to go back to basics as much as I could, so I could make sure I knew some of the basic facts, because I feel like it's quite easy to feel like you know what's going on but actually have no idea. And so I did that, and I tried to make things like there's in the show, they find all these old CDs and DVDs which they call duvdas, and they don't understand what they are. And then they realize that they can make them into their own solar panels and stuff like that. And so I wanted to make it as sort of practical and hands-on as I possibly could. And I think that was the best way to engage the young people. And the environment that was created was the whole set, and the costumes were all sets that have been used by BYMT before, and costumes people have brought themselves, and same with props. And so we tried to create an environment as much as possible where that was sort of the thought process. And I think sort of going on from what Will said, it's in this, the stakes could not be higher. And I think it's difficult sometimes to know how to access climate crisis through theatre, because it can seem like sort of an impenetrable subject. But I think once I remembered and we got the young people sort of considering the fact that it is a life or death situation, there's nothing more theatrical than that. And so I think the young people actually really, it was great because they could really lean into all of that, and also as going on, also find the sort of the joy in creating your own world and being forced to be imaginative and being forced to make stuff, for me as a writer and as the young people, was very inspiring. Yeah. So that's
amazing.
that.
Amazing, thanks. Amazing. We've got in my order, Michael. Who's here?
Have we lost Michael?
That's really good
do you
timing,
want to
isn't it?
chat instead? Yes. Are you happy to talk us through a little bit about the
Oh,
project?
he's back.
Is Michael back? Because I think you're both going to tag team to some degree, aren't you?
Brilliant.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Amazing.
Do you want to go, Michael? Oh, no, we can't hear you. You're still on mute.
There we go. Hi. Sorry about that. Yeah, my connection at the moment. So yeah, Tilly and I are writing musical, My Musical. It's a comedy horror sci-fi, and it's set in future London, where the majority of the population have been forced to live underground due to the unsustainability of the climate. Our dystopian show is about sustainability, surviving the climate crisis, and fatbergs. If you don't know what fatbergs are, they are essentially, it was defined in 2018 by Thames Water as a very large mass of congealed fat and solid waste in our sewage system. They're real, they're here now, they're underneath us, and they're disgusting. So yeah, in London at the moment, they're basically a demonstration of kind of human failure and our relationship to sustainability, because yeah, everything that we flush down our toilets, everything that goes down our sinks goes into the same pipes and eventually just congeals into this crazy concrete-like substance that is incredibly difficult to get rid of. So, I mean, at its core, mine is about sustainability and our personal collective responsibility for it. It's told through a genre lens, an exciting, big, futuristic adventure where the stakes in 2432 reflect those of today. I'm just going to
jump in here just slightly to say that I think it's really interesting that in the context of what Lewis and Gaynor were saying about like none of the stories that we've talked about so far have been set kind of today. They all either set in the past or in the future, and that's like a big part of why we wanted to set ours in the future, and also like use sci-fi as like a form to help tell the story, because it sort of helps us kind of tell things and show things in a way which can be quite confronting, but it's sort of I'm sure there's a technical term for this, but you know, like, yes, anyway, we're all artists. I've got brain fog. I'm going to pass back to Michael.
Way to use analogy and metaphor, essentially. Yeah, it's explicitly dealing with our climate crisis today, but the entire world, the structure of the show and the narrative reflect our current situations. So all of the politics, the dramaturgy woven into fabric of the show, but never at the expense of the characters or stories. So the characters make discoveries and fight against obstacles that mirror oppositional forces today. Ultimately uniting the two societies, one above and one below, to face the actual threat, which is the change in the climate and fatbergs. Essentially, like the decision to create a musical about fatbergs, at least for me, or fatbergs and sustainability and climate crisis, comes kind of from a place of urgency and, well, fascination, I guess. I mean, when you kind of think about it, fatbergs are this bizarre yet tangible symbol of our modern environmental challenges. They're these hidden monsters lurking beneath our cities, and they force us to confront kind of the consequences of our societal actions, at least. The climate crisis is arguably the most pressing issue today, I think. And musical theatre has this power to engage and inspire people in ways that other mediums might struggle to do so. So we want to use this kind of this unique art form to tell a story that's both entertaining and thrilling and thought-provoking. Get audiences to kind of reflect on the world around them. I guess to serve as a catalyst as well for our audiences. I mean, we live in a world where we face profound challenges in terms of the environment, and we kind of want to inspire our audiences to think critically about the way we live and the choices that we make. Kind of want them to leave the theatre with a sense of consideration, at least, towards the environment, and kind of see a connection between their daily lives and a larger issues with climate crisis. I think
it's very much a part of within the show as well, that the characters go through a similar journey to that. So it's right. Not just like telling people, oh, you should do this. It's sort of like we're with the characters on the journey as they kind of discover this, and they discover ways of community organizing and resistance and kind of revolution stuff and things like that as well.
Yeah, because you've got two different characters from two different perspectives on sustainability. You've got one coming from above, where the more elitist and rich have a certain view of things, and you've got people from below who are mining the fatberg, who have a different perspective on it. And I think, both the journeys of these two characters kind of foster an understanding and empathy of these two different viewpoints, and kind of hopefully encourage dialogue and critical thinking amongst the audience.
We've also talked quite a lot about how the fact that because fatbergs are a today problem, that like even and like climate change sort of often feels like this enormous thing that feels unsolvable on like a day-to-day kind of like, tomorrow can I solve the climate crisis? Probably not. And that sort of paralyzes people in how they respond to like their responsibility or being able to do anything about it. So we sort of kind of have structured into the play a sense of this, and Kate, who's our dramaturg, is very keen to not have a very like neat bow at the end and kind of be like everything's tied up and we solved all the problems, to kind of keep like a relatively open ending. But we also wanted to have some kind of narrative satisfaction stuff. So there's actually a two-tiered threat within the whole play, and one of them gets properly solved by them all coming together to resolve the situation, and then they commit to resolving the bigger thing afterwards, and there's like hope and solidarity and all the things like that community action kind of can facilitate moving forward. So we hope that there's a sort of realistic, hopeful sense for people leaving the theatre, like they're roused and motivated to do more and feel like that they can do more even if they can't solve everything in a day, you know, that kind of vibe maybe.
Nice. Thank you. Last but not least, Evelyn, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about your work, that'll be great. And then we'll go into wider discussion. I've got loads of questions. Hopefully.
Hi, thank you.
Not everyone else will have millions of others.
Thanks so much for including me in this conversation. It's fantastic to hear about all the work going on. I'm buzzing, kind of making connections and trying to draw little lines between things as you're all talking. In a slightly different world, I am a theatre academic based at a university where I teach and research and write about climate in theatre, and I'm specifically working on a project at the moment on climate change in musical theatre. So my provocation, or maybe it's where we're getting to through the conversation, as we James and Will started with the future, and then Tilly and Michael, you were talking about that kind of present. And I think, as I was thinking, well, the future is here. I mean, we have drought. The world is literally on fire around us. These floods that you can't keep up with it on the news. Earthquakes this week. And I was thinking, like, who is telling these stories? What are the stories of the present? And in my research, I am interested in weathering and how do we weather. I think that weathering is something that is performed. And weathering is not just about adapting to and being resilient, but might also include activism, grieving, and being joyous. Some of you mentioned hope and joy there, and I think that all of the different emotions are kind of part of the mix. But how do we, as humans and non-humans, kind of adapt and perform our weathering? So my project that I'm looking at the moment, I'm calling Singing in the Rain, which is looking at climate joy and musical theatre. I'm interested in tracking representations of joy in the weather from kind of Singing in the Rain, that moment in the 1950s when it kind of enters our consciousness as this, like, it feels preposterous, right? Formally to think, oh, like it's raining badly, so inclement weather, we dance. But what do we do? So I'm interested, so not just being flippant, but yes, being flippant and taking the kind of the flippant stuff, the camp stuff seriously, and going, well, what can we learn about joyous and more ethically, socially just presents and futures from the past and also the present. So the kind of work at the moment involves looking around at musicals. I was thinking of revivals like the Watermill's Lord of the Rings, which some of you may have seen, which kind of integrates ecology into the kind of the Tolkien storyline, where the audience kind of comes together at the end and has to kind of rebuild the Shire, as it were. So it's kind of integrated into the story. Works like Hadestown, where the climate is a part of the retelling of the Greek myth. Maybe some of the new writing, like Amy Draper's Islander, which again has conservation in a Scottish island at the heart of what it's thinking about. Meta theatre's work, Sherlock Holmes and the Poisonwood taking like a story that we know from the canon, a genre, and looking at how ecology fits into that. And what else was I thinking? Also just last year that I had seen Groundhog Day over the summer. And I mean, of course, it's about a weather forecaster, but you get to this point of real emotional breakdown for him, where he is, attempting suicide. So it's really, really dark. And he sings, but within that song, he sings, God, oh God, this goddamn weather will last forever. And so I'm like, okay, well, here we have a musical that is about the eternal recurrence of a gray February day. And what does it mean to be stuck in weather? And so the human story is there, but the human story is so connected with the relationship to weather. The weather metaphors are through all of our songs. It's how we sing, how we have poetry, how we make sense of the world. Anyway, so that's kind of the project that I'm thinking about. And it's so fantastic to hear about your work and the projects that you're doing. Thanks.
Thanks. Ties it all together really lovely, that way of thinking about it. Yeah. I was just thinking, as you're talking about it, like, certainly in this country, we talk about weather all the time. Of course, it's absolutely embedded in the way we think about everything. I'm going to suggest that we just launch straight into any questions that anybody has. If anybody has any questions for any of the people who've spoken or want to say anything about things they're doing, feel free. There's not that many of us, so I'm going to say just shout out, and if everybody shouts at the same time, we'll come up with a better way of doing things. But before we do that, I should say I think that we're recording this session sort of in case that turns out to be a useful thing. If anybody would rather we didn't, just maybe let us know, or rather we didn't sort of share anything that they say, let us know. But just so you know that before you shout out too vehemently.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, the recording, we won't be posting this on YouTube or something. It's more just using, if there are people that have said they wanted to join us, just sending them individually to catch up on the call. We might make some notes from the conversation as well to share with people that wanted to be part of the meeting but couldn't be here at this time.
And likewise, you're more than welcome to tell us at the end if you realise you said something you'd rather no one else knew. You don't have to censor yourself beforehand. Just sort of a bit of etiquette that we should say that now. Yeah, if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to say, do shout out. If not, I'll get going because I got other things to do. So. No, right. In which case, that's great. It means I get to go first. I was thinking about sort of several themes out of things that sort of everybody talks about really in different ways. Sort of the type of problem, the type of situation that the environment crisis sort of presents. And sort of how we engage with that type of a problem, because it's sort of simultaneously absolutely massive. It affects absolutely everything, absolutely every part of the way that absolutely everybody did. And it's about lots of really small, very individual, very specific things. So I guess I'm going to split this into several questions actually, because there's lots of parts of this. I'm going to sort of pause on that idea, and I think the question is sort of how. And I'm going to leave this open to anyone to sort of jump in, any one of you guys to sort of jump in on it and tell us about how you engaged or grappled with this thought, that sort of how you dealt with the fact that climate and the environment is such a massive issue. And also it's lots of small issues, and sort of what is it that pulled you into it? What is it that you sort of found most interesting to sort of write about and think about? How did you sort of tie those parts of it together? I'm going to leave that as a very broad question. But broadly about the sort of impenetrableness of the subject. It's massive. It's so huge. I think somebody used that word, impenetrable. And also there are loads of little bits. You know, you could write a whole show about how we just have to do this one little thing. I'm going to leave that open to anybody who'd like to speak to one side or the other, or the difficulty with finding a middle ground. You put your hand up and then Tilly come to it too.
I was going to say, I think one thing, like what I was writing is, it's heavily based on sort of the politicization of the climate crisis, and that's kind of a way to. It's hard though, because once again, you don't want really black and white thinking too much of these things, but I think through that, at least you can sort of distill it into different opinions quite clearly within the show, because if somebody is rooting for a certain character that believes in one thing, and then they might be rooting for a character who believes in the other, that's quite a healthy and challenging way to try and make that clearer. And I also think by making characters within that are flawed and also contain the multitudes of it as well. So in this piece, the witch, who is killed at the beginning of the play, we find out at the end that actually she was sort of a contemporary of Greta Thunberg, and that she actually was trying her best to survive, but because she was sort of banished, she went insane. And so by doing that, you sort of flip the story on its head, and it leaves the audience with a bit more of, I think, compassion. And I think that's kind of a key to get them in a lot of the time, is by showing two sides to different stories. I don't know if that's really answered it, but it has slightly.
Absolutely, I think that's great. Billy.
Your idea, Lewis, is so cool. I just like getting very caught up in like the whole thing. I guess we approach this kind of scale issue with we have done a huge amount of world building, and Fatberg is kind of like the equivalent of kind of the broader climate crisis, but more specifically kind of fossil fuels and our reliance on it. So it's the main energy source in this futuristic world that we've created, which is like we call it Londonberg, and it's like a society which has people living above ground in a small kind of sealed microcity, and then the rest of the population live below ground, mining the Fatberg. So it's like the main source of economy for everything. It's the foundational fuel. It's a huge part of the propaganda of everything. It means that this city is self-sufficient and it's not relying on any. We don't know what's going on in the rest of this post-apocalyptic world. It's about this kind of place. So what happens throughout the play is kind of, we find out that Fatberg, which has been presented as being this solution to everything, is actually the main problem of it, and is the source of kind of everything just about to end. And then of course, like, we also find out that different people had different levels of awareness of this problem and what they've been doing or not doing, etc. But it fundamentally, throughout the play, we shift our relationship to it, and the characters shift their relationship to it. So I guess that's how we sort of approached it. So it sort of, the scale of it sort of reflects the scale of what you're talking about, how big it is. Does that make sense? I think it does.
I think just to add to what people have been saying, but I think, it's almost, it's difficult to get your head around the danger that we're all facing, and I think I remember one day, I think we were in tech or something, it was coming very close to opening the show, and I remember I'd had this at the end. I'd written this piece at the end where Kemp is going to say what he believes in, and it's going to be this show-stopping moment. And I remember going, oh, I've made a massive mistake here. People are just going to get bored and switch off. This is like why have you done this? This is ridiculous. And I remember walking to the theatre. We co-produced it in Aberystwyth. I was walking into the campus there, and I just thought, yeah, but you've got to say it, because if we don't say it, it's never going to get communicated. And yeah, it's bleak. But if we have to say, and I think that's one of the things, is communicating fact. We can wrap it up in whatever we want, but this is what's facing us. And I think it's more of that is needed to be said. I feel that we can't make it palatable because it's not palatable. And I think another thing that I find quite interesting about this is that we wrote a musical, interesting what Evelyn was saying, it's basically called Eye of the Storm, which is about a young girl who tries to harness the power of a tornado for renewable energy. And I wrote that in I think it was like 2015. I think we got to make it in 2017. The other thing that is really scary about all of this, creating musicals now, is it's happening now. So whatever we write now, knowing the sort of like the pattern of how you actually get anything produced these days is going to take 2 years. So whatever it'll be, it is going to be historical by the time you get it on the stage. So I think that those are the elements that I find really interesting. I think it's brilliant, those things that are written in the future, because, you know, I think that's where it probably lies. You know, that's what we need to be able to do, that, but able to update the science, because the science is constantly changing, and how we do that within developing a piece of theatre. But I think, and what oh sorry, I'm trying to find, where's he gone on the thing? Where's he gone? The Hansel and Gretel musical. I think it's brilliant that he's involving young people, because I think that is so vital, because these are the people who are going to be voting. And I think whichever, again, we can't avoid it. This is a political decisions that, you know, we can recycle, and we can eat less meat. We can do all those great things that we think the small changes. But unless those politicians decide not to consume and to make money out of oil and gas and those fossil fuels, it ain't ever going to change. And so it has to happen. So I think if a musical is going to come in, I haven't done this, but I feel that there needs to be a political protest musical that really makes it stark. And that if those young people see that and then go, do you know what? I'm voting green, or I'm going to vote for the party that is basically going to stop these fossil fuels. That is the only answer now. And so I think it's just keeping abreast of everything, keeping up to date with it all. That is the challenge. But I don't think you can avoid it. I don't think we can avoid what's coming our way like rapidly. I know it sounds bleak. I'm still hopeful. I'm still, do you know what I mean? I still think we can change this, because we're an amazing species. But I think if money leads it, you know, people aren't going to change. You know, people where I live, you know, like I'm in Merthyr today, you know, on the weekends, everybody's in McDonald's. This is the most impoverished town, you know, but they still decide to go to McDonald's and eat ridiculous, you know, and nothing you can say is going to change that, unless the food that is good for them is made cheaper and more available. But who's going to do that? Who's going to, you know, and how do we get those people to actually understand that? But if it's an economical decision, they're going to go with the cheapest. You know, none of us, you know, I don't travel by train to work. I do twice a week, but I don't, because it's too expensive. It's empty. The trains are empty. It's like everybody's in first class. There's nobody on the train. But it's because of, you know, so those things, these fundamental political things have to change. And perhaps musicals and theatre can be a catalyst for that, potentially.
Here's hoping, definitely. And just to jump in on something you were saying, Gaynor, one of the things I've heard about your musical Operation Julie is just, well, certainly, you know, and I can't wait to see it. I know you're touring again soon. I feel bad that I haven't seen it so far, but I've heard that it's such a good night out. And what we're always hearing from people programming venues currently is that post-pandemic audiences are a little bit cautious in their booking patterns, and they want to be sold a good night out or a known brand. And it gets that thing you mentioned about having that tech day, the moment of doubt about, you know, is it going to be palatable enough for an audience, and knowing that we have to be brave and almost use some of the content as a Trojan horse, that it's this balance, isn't it, between still providing a good night out, still providing entertainment, and at the same time using the form of musical theatre to challenge as well as to entertain. And that balance is something I wanted to ask the various creative, or everyone on the call, you know, what do you think, you know, what it's about, the, you know, because I think everyone's talking about the dramaturgy of the projects in terms of it's how we're incorporating the characters' journeys as sort of role modeling almost for audience members, so that we've got various characters on different points of the spectrum in terms of cynicism or activism, and being able for people to identify with characters and then perhaps go on that journey. We know this is something that musical theatre does so well, is is moving people from one place at the beginning of the show to being in a different emotional space by the end of the show, and that we can give people, when you look at shows like Les Miserables, where a lot of the stage time is about people dying or living in very desperate circumstances and times of conflict, and yet people leave feeling buoyed up with a sense of hope. So I'm interested to know what people think about this balance of how we get the prickly content in with the activism and the calls to action alongside balance. What's the way of balancing that with the entertainment? I mean, Urinetown is another musical that comes to mind very much as an influence in this, isn't it? That it's been around, was it 25 years now, and it still feels like that's one of those key examples where it's a comedy, it's satire the whole way through, but very much about sustainable resources and living in a dystopian future or past or wherever it's set. But yeah, do people have further thoughts about how they've consciously approached that balance between the wanting to still attract an audience and being able to market the show, and how to still not shy away from those scary bits? Tilly.
We made a conscious decision early on that it was going to be a genre-based show, and sci-fi is one of those genres which we've kind of touched on, but we also wanted to make it a comedy horror. And I think using comedy horror is a really good lens to write stuff through, because you of course get the comedy, you get kind of the funness of it, but like there's a sinisterness to everything that that horror allows you to explore, and that kind of taps into what Will was saying earlier about like you can intellectually understand something, but you often need to feel something as well. And I think horror as a medium is a way to do that. And then also we had lots of discussions very early on in our process. We're still like writing the show, but where we like the songs that we've got, like the whole thing just has to be really good. And I think that often sometimes when things are getting made and people are really focusing on the point of something, is that maybe the creative side of it doesn't get quite as much attention, or it feels less important because it's more of a conceptual piece of art rather than the actual art itself. And I think that we've definitely always kept like the artistic integrity of everything very much in the foreground of that, so you still get a good night out, which seems similar to what Gain was saying. But yeah, it also does have this like scaffolding, which is, you know, serious and all of the good stuff that we're talking about, but it's definitely got all of the bunting there as well.
Yeah, to add to that, Tilly, and back to where Gaynor started, with a good story, I think it's not to kind of think, hey, we're here instrumentalizing art. And I mean, sure, you can do that, and for activist purposes, that might be really what you want to do, but not to lose sight maybe of, James, what you were saying about the kind of strengths of the form, maybe around emotional affect, the good story, what theatre can do that's different to other art forms in terms of, or other modes of storytelling, or science communication, is to convey complexity and contradiction, and that it doesn't have to be tied up with a bow, but actually to add depth of complexity to that conversation seems really important, especially when they're like, I always go back to this thing, but the saved planet, you know, we don't know what the resolution to the climate crisis is. We don't have one answer like, oh, resolved, take, that's what it looks like. So there's all kinds of exploration to be done there. I think Michael and Tilly were talking about world building. You know, what are the worlds that might be built that might look like it? I mean, are we really just talking about not 1.5, you know, not missing that target, or are we actually talking about transformation in which people are not on boats, you know, trying to find a life that is livable? So what does the saved planet look like? So there are all kinds of complexities that theatre can offer, that, you know, that good LSD story, you know, like what's the good story? It doesn't have to do everything, but is it a good enough story to do something to get us thinking in a way that is interesting, I guess.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just to add in, is that okay? Sorry, I think one of the things that hit us as well, like we honestly, we did not know how the show was going to go. So it was just like, oh my God, you know, what have we done? But at the end, you know, at the end of performances, and what Aberystwyth was telling us, and a lot of the theatres were, there was people coming to see the show that they'd never seen in the theatre before. Because they were these aging hippies, you know, they were like these, you know, they just didn't go to the theatre. They just didn't, you know, because they said it wasn't for them. But, and they said, you know, at last they had a musical that was for them, because it had prog rock, the music that they listened to in the 70s, in the 60s, late 60s and 70s, they were listening, you know, this is their music, and quite obscure music as well, like Caravan and, you know, these type of King Crimson. You know, I've never even heard of these groups, do you know what I mean? But I worked with an amazing musical director called Greg Palmer, who it's almost like he's like, he could do mastermind on it without a shadow of a doubt, you know what I mean? But it was just, and there was a lot of people, like there's a song called I Want to Change the World, but I Don't Know What to Do, by 10 Years After, I think they're called. And there were young people in the audience in the Q&A sessions going, did you just write that song for this musical? And we were like, no, actually it exists, you know. So I think there was that element to it. It sort of surprised people. But I also, just going back on that thing about balancing it out, one of the things, the struggles I had with it was that if you've got an evangelical hippie LSD creator banging on about why it's important to save the planet, you know, you can turn people off pretty quickly then, especially if there's more cynical in the audience. So to how I made him, well, not so much him, actually, I couldn't really change him, because he needed to be that, and that's what he was like at that time. But his partner, Christine Bott, she was a local GP, and again, she was on this journey with him to change the world, you know, but there was something more that she felt more spiritual about it, you know, very much in tune with the land. They lived off the land and all these sort of things. That was an attractive quality, you know, and also the songs that we gave her. Again, a brilliant actor musician, Georgina White, was fantastic. You know, she just, it sometimes it looked a little bit, when you looked at the band on stage, it was a little bit Fleetwood-esque mass, you know, do you know what I mean? It was like, here we go. But those elements to it helped the story along, you know. So it was just being really judicious about about how, which songs and which person sang that song. I found that, you know, I'm going to say this now, I don't know why I'm saying this, I'm not a musical person. So for me, working with a musical director who knew those songs and which characters have those, I find that absolutely fascinating in the process. I learned so much from that. And yeah, so I think it's those things as well, isn't it, within the creating of the show, is really, I think for anybody who does this stuff, it's just, you know, it's just why we do it, I suppose. It's just, you're learning all the time, I think.
Amazing. Just occurred to me that we should maybe, that we're doing a 2-hour session here, so we should maybe take a little break in the middle of it, if that would be good for people. I've certainly got more questions. I also don't want to just talk and not let anyone else have a chance to ask anything. So, James, I suggest maybe we take 5 minutes now, just a quick, to give everyone a chance to pop to the loo, get a glass of water, whatever. When we come back, if anybody's got any questions, absolutely fire away. Otherwise, I'll carry on firing through my long list of things I want to know. I reckon 5 minutes. I reckon that puts 2:10. So we can keep the Zoom open, I assume, James, and pop in and out.
Yeah,
we'll see people back in a minute.
Jump back in. Great. Ray, back with it after a biscuit and a cup of tea, huh? Snack breaks, sustainable snacks. Oh, what have you had, Tilly? That looks like a very healthy snack.
They're dark chocolate peanut things, but they're doisy and jam, so they're ethical, vegan-y, no palm oil.
Oh, impressive. I saw someone posting on social media yesterday.
I hope they're good. It's
The
not
act of,
greenwashing.
I saw some amazing statistics that if, I don't know what percentage, like say everyone went vegan overnight, just what a huge impact that would have on so many different areas of the climate crisis in terms of, like I think they said it would reduce carbon emissions by 40% overnight just by the population going vegan. So clearly every individual that goes vegan, it's making an impact at least. Anyway, over to Will.
I don't think that could be quite true, sadly. I think 25% of total emissions come from farming. So maybe they meant 40% of that. Maybe. But anyway, it's just still definitely a big impact. Great, welcome back. Hope everyone had a good moment. Looked out the window or got a snack or something. Does anybody have any other questions they want to ask, or do I get to carry on? Question. No pressure if nobody does. But
Yeah, I do actually.
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, so kind of had a question about specific initiatives or partnerships that theatres or organisations can kind of pursue or promote, if anybody's got any ideas or knows of any specifically around sustainability to raise awareness within the theatre community.
Are you thinking from a sort of artistic, creative point of view, or just sort of anything to do with sustainability?
Yes, that means from an artistic point of view, but also from kind of a practical point of view in regards to theatres and other organisations that involve us.
I can say a little bit to that, and then if anybody else has anything that I don't cover, absolutely chip in as well. From a creative point of view, I actually don't know very much. I know the National Theatre are sort of trying to pull together an event in end of this month. I think they're calling it the Director's Day, or that was their sort of working title for it at one point. But it definitely is broader than just directors. It's sort of all creative angles. And they're trying to sort of get people together to come and sort of share the ways that they have engaged with everything to do with climate and the environment in making work. But I think that is much more ad hoc, and they're doing this one day, and there will have conversations that sort of spiral out from that, but it's not a continuous network. The John Marr obviously we're doing a lot of thinking about this sort of stuff and climate dramaturgy. I know that Zoe's work there has resulted in a sort of academic report, essentially, that she's sort of written, sort of summing up a lot of what they did and what she learned from that. I think either have been released already or will be released at this day at the National. I haven't read it all yet. It's very long. It's very much a piece of academic work rather than a quick read. But there's a lot of depth in it. There are sort of non-art-based initiatives that are sort of relevant to what we do. There are some sort of groups looking at helping people have climate-related conversations and that kind of stuff, which is not at all sort of art-based, but is definitely relevant to the way how we portray a lot of this stuff and how we think about it. We work in this stuff in. From a very much more practical point of view, there's things like the Theatre Green Book, UK Theatre, SALT have a group of mostly sort of operations managers and technical managers and producing staff in theatre sort of talk to each other, but that's very much from a practical point of view. We ran for a while, we've sort of paused it for a bit during the pandemic and since, but we ran for a while a group called the Sustainable Touring Group that was about trying to bring some companies and some venues together to sort of talk to each other about how to tour better. there's lots of sort of individual and ad hoc conversations going on. All of the, again, on a practical level, all of the sort of industry bodies have some form of grouping, conversation, facilitating thing going on. The designers society, SVP have a sustainability working group. ALD, the Lighting Designers Group, have a sustainability working group. The Production Managers Forum have a sustainability group. But again, they are all quite practical, sort of carbon reduction issues rather than creative engagement with it, which I think is absolutely why James and I really wanted to have this conversation now, because there aren't a lot of established conversations going on about this. There have been a few attempts at it, but there aren't an awful lot of really established big networks talking about it at all. I don't know if anybody else has any other either smaller or different experiences that they could chip in with. Please then go ahead.
You go, Ethan.
Yeah, only that I was thinking a little about, I mean, there's more plays, but Chantal Biladou's Climate Change Theatre Action that some of you may have come across, that where she commissions 50 playwrights from around the world to make short plays. It's usually coincides with COP. I know there's one in 2023, but that and the Artists in Climate Change work, there's the Centre for Sustainable Practice in the Arts support is a nice place to enter into conversations, into dialogue with other artists who are thinking about these kinds of questions. But not much musical work that I've seen, so again.
But it feels eminently fundable, doesn't it? I mean, that's the thing. Like, certainly the Arts Council, as I was saying earlier, has it as a funding priority, well, an investment principle that means that all of its nationally funded organizations throughout the country have to report what they're doing every year, year by year, in relation to their public funding around environmental sustainability. And they're steer all of their MPOs towards Julie's Bicycle still as the main sort of sector support organization I get in terms of helping Arts Council funded organizations identify what other adjustments they should be making, and operationally they're the sort of the main signposted industry body that people are led towards. And
I would say that all of that is very practically focused.
Yeah,
that's pretty much all that Julie's Bicycle do. They've got loads of amazing resources about practical things, but they pretty much only really look at practical things. And unfortunately, I think that the Arts Council steering is quite practical at the moment.
Yeah, that's very true. That's exactly as you say.
I haven't felt much of a sort of steer towards engaging with the issues as opposed to just being a bit more practical. That is the subject of another of my questions, so we'll come back into a bit more of that, I think. But go for it, Gaynor. You had something to add into that.
Yeah, just to say, from like a Wales perspective, I know that National Theatre Wales had a symposium a couple of weeks back at the in Newport. I know that our company has been working with Theatre Iolo as so small scale touring companies, you know, and discussing that. But again, I think it's interesting, isn't it? It is very much a production manager, administrative led thing. And it's interesting what you were saying there, Michael, actually, because I was just thinking about it then. A lot of the challenges we're finding with Operation Julie is that we can't get a venue in England. You know, not many people know of Nanog, so it's like, you know, there's not a name in the show. It's not an Agatha Christie. So, you know, it's like trying to get a venue, and they're lovely, and they're basically saying, we just can't take the risk, you know. And it's like, okay, you know, you sort of keep your thoughts to yourself then, isn't it? But I'm just wondering whether it's more of perhaps something to start where the venues are engaging with the audiences, because perhaps audiences want to see this, but we will never know. And perhaps it's a case of perhaps artistic creatives almost setting up, like, I don't know, little focus groups saying, look, I'm thinking of doing this show about this element or something, and then getting and starting small and, you know, really at grassroots level and working out, because at the end of the day, those are the people who are going to be buying the tickets to see these productions. And I think, you know, perhaps we don't know what audiences actually want.
Although we do know that, I mean, it's a really good point, Gaynor, that increasingly we're talking to artistic directors and programmers saying that when they're consulting with their audiences, loud and clear, so often they're saying they want more musical theatre. Currently, coming out of the pandemic, musical theatre is something that's gone up people's priorities list. So that's one plus. But I think you're totally right that the more we can make a case to an artistic director or a programmer saying this is what the audience appeal is, these are the sort of demographics that we're reaching. And it was a key point you made earlier, I think, about the styles of music, the genres of music that a specific musical uses, is when you get that equation right, it has such an impact on who comes through the door in terms of audience development for a venue. And we've seen some really successful case studies where audiences have partnered with particular companies to really lean into a particular demographic that's a target for their audience development over the next few years, and programming musicals that have a particular appeal through the style of music that they're using has been a big win sometimes in terms of audience development strategy. So I think the more we can make a case for programming a musical based on both the evidence of who it's reached so far as audiences, but chiming with knowing what that venue is trying to achieve in terms of audience development, it's so key, absolutely, at the moment.
And I think it's really interesting, about working with the New Wolseley in Ipswich. It's finding those really generous partners in it, because I do think with resources getting to a minimum now, I think co-producing is probably the only way to get anything made. We could never do there's 9 actors in Operation Julie. We would never be able to afford that without additional funding from the Arts Council and without being a co-producer with Aberystwyth. It was just not possible, So I think it's also like almost something that we could have, like I hate to say this, like a speed dating thing between venues and a creative team to say, look, I've got this musical. It's like a pitching idea, I suppose. I know you probably do all this anyway, but just to get those conversations going, and I think getting people back in the room together, I think is the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always so. We did do one speed dating event years ago, and there's often quite a reluctance. Sometimes venues will do it directly more with performers, but there's often a reluctance, frustratingly, for people to make themselves that available. But absolutely, we often do introductions, and that kind of bespoke signposting, I think, is how so often it works. And we're very happy to do that always when people want to come to MTN and say, look, who are the other venues I should be talking to? Here's who I'm talking to. And we often have those conversations where we say, oh, what about this person? And certainly, it's looking at who are the more musical theatre engaged venues. And there is a sort of informal kind of consortium between some of the venues you mentioned already, but certainly very much Birmingham Hippodrome, the Lowry, certainly Mastered, Starling in Southampton are starting to get more involved again. There's a group that often co-produce, that I think it's about sort of linking in with some of those networks of venues that already trust each other as co-producing partners on a project, and to piggyback on what's worked in the past is so key, as you say. But it's positive at the moment, though. It feels like more doors are opening than closing in terms of venues that want to receive musicals. So
I wanted to ask sort of all of you, I think, to think a bit more about sort of the root of that bit we've just been talking about, which I think is largely what the public perception of thinking about climate broadly is like. I think almost everybody, in talking about your individual project, talks about either the need for hope or the problem with sort of doomsday or sort of post-apocalyptic situations, or the idea of an apocalypse. And I guess for me, I think that there is a huge perception that as soon as anybody talks about climate, they're going to be really negative. They're going to tell everybody that they can't do anything that they want to do anymore, and it's all going to be really disastrous, and everybody's going to get really depressed about it. And I guess I think that is the root of why people are struggling, why programmers are struggling, or why we're struggling to get work programmed that we say is about the climate. And I think I sort of wrote down a couple of words that people said, talking about things earlier. Somebody talked about needing to make their work palatable. Somebody talked about the show needing to be good, which I've never heard anybody talk about writing a show about anything other than the environment, and having to remember to say that it needs to be good. And just the very fact that we feel we have to remember to say that. And we're the people who are writing it. It's like, of course we want to write something good. Whoever set out to write something that wasn't good? But like, there's such a strong perception that that isn't the important thing, what we're doing, that we're here to be worthy, and we're here to tell everybody they can't do good for some stuff anymore. And somebody else said something about how sort of the sort of balance between writing something that's good, and writing and sort of keeping to your point, you know, sticking to what you're trying to say and think about in it. I'm not quite sure where the question is going on this one, but I sort of, I'm interested to hear sort of how you guys have thought about that sort of distinction between obviously wanting to write something good, wanting to write something that other people will think that they want to see, and sort of how much of a message or an idea or a thing that you wanted to think about that, how much of that either sort of triggered the start of the whole process for you, or I was really interested in what you were saying about how you only realized sort of partway through starting it that actually it was about the environment and it wasn't, you know, a police chase. And sort of how the fact that you are writing something with a message or a concept or a thought going on has affected the way you write it and the way you then think about working on it. Again, that's rather a loosely formed question, but I'd love to hear a bit of thoughts on that. Anyway.
I'll just go, yeah, you know, just very quickly then, that when it was definitely that. It was, I didn't realize it was until I read his you know, I'd met some of the hippies around then, and they were all talking about this getting back to the land, you know, this sort of philosophy. And it was during that really that I was going this, and they were so committed to it. They were like, when I was talking to them, it was like, this is what it was all about, you know, because I think the perception before that was that they were just, you know, on acid, just having an amazing summer. Do you know what I mean? And it was like, actually, it's not just that, you know. And then I got into like the Club of Rome and all that philosophy behind that as well. And so it became, and it's interesting as well, because like I'm like gung-ho about the, you know, about the environment and about, you know, so, you know, I haven't bought any clothes for about 5 years. Do you know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. But so for me, it was like, oh, this is a gift now then. This is a gift. I can actually get this across, you know. The other thing as well, which was again sort of strange, was that we'd done this musical, The Eye of the Storm, about this young girl, and that story came from working with young carers. So it was working with a young carer and thinking, well, actually, no, I wasn't aware of young carers. So it's like, how do I make her story, you know, how do I get that story out there? And it was in conversations, we consult an awful lot with teachers, young people, you know, and I'd been in a conference with science teachers, and they were saying, we've got a massive problem that young girls are not taking science beyond year 9. They're just basically dropping out. And we want to try and think of something that could inspire them. So it was almost like a couple of things. It's not just about the climate. There are other things that influence it that could probably propel the story forward. And again, you know, she invents this, you know, this tornado, this sort of machine that can harness tornadoes. And I thought I'd better just Google this just to check that nobody has actually invented this. Don't want to be sued. And this scientist from Quebec came up, and he used to work for an oil company. He was an oil company engineer, and he'd basically got completely disillusioned with the industry. And he has invented with money from PayPal, this prototype, which is, it harnesses tornadoes for renewable energy. And I contacted him and I just said, oh, look, you know, can I use your invention? And he was like, yeah, absolutely, because this could be the musical that changes how people think about the climate. And I was like, oh, I wanted to do one about young carers. I was like, oh, yeah, great. Okay, we'll do that then. And it's like, we've done that twice. We did it in 2017, and then we brought it back in 2019 to do the show. But how, again, now the sort of the responsibility that you have, actually this is a climate musical, it changes, it shifts, the sort of the dynamic of that play, of that musical then has shifted, because now I'm not writing about a young carer and their issues, I'm actually writing about a young carer who invents something that could be of use to us in the future. So it's, I think it's just very tricksy, isn't it? I go back to that thing of like, we've got to get audiences in, we've got to get them enjoying theatre again, but we have this massive issue coming our way, and I think it was interesting, if you look back at, musicals of the past, how those issues that are in those musicals are contemporary and contentious at that time, and how they've used that, we've just got to go down that track really, and see if that works, because at the moment we sort of like clutching at straws, aren't we? So yeah.
I think I'm just going to jump in there as well. I mean, I think that kind of brings us to the idea that collaboration is kind of a powerful avenue for us as artists as well, especially for climate crisis within the theatre industry. I think we've got a unique opportunity to kind of harness the expertise of scientists, researchers, and just experts, I suppose, on working on environmental solutions. Because in our case, for the Fatberg musical, we involved scientists, and feel free to jump in, Tilly, who were at the forefront of efforts to break down fatbergs and repurpose them as sustainable fuel source. And so the musical not only addresses a pressing environmental issue, but also benefits from the real world knowledge and insights to these experts. And so this does bring, I think, authenticity to storytelling, to our storytelling. And so it ensures that scientific aspects of the narrative are grounded in current research, that the challenges are presented in the musical, or anybody's musical, but ours specifically, I suppose, align with kind of real world possibilities.
We're working, we've got like two scientists that we specifically have been working with since the very beginning. One who specializes in kind of energy and also just fatbergs as a material and studying that, and then also somebody who's a parasitologist who specializes in kind of more broadly sort of parasites and bacteria and things, but also so how fatbergs as a medium can kind of hold on to things like that and all of that stuff. So I think also opening out what Michael's just said about and building on that, and also tying to what Gaynor was saying, is that our musical didn't start off as a climate change musical either. Kate, who's like the co-creator of it, and we went to see Fatberg, which was an exhibition at the London Museum of London, and we kind of went because we thought it was gross, and there was like a chunk of fatberg in a perspex box with like sweat on the inside and like little flies, like it was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, but it was fascinating. And we literally kind of, and there was this great it was quite a small exhibition, like beautifully curated, and it had like an outfit of somebody who works as a flusher in the sewer system, as part of the display. And we were just like, this would make a great show. So we literally went to the cafe at the Museum of London and started like nutting out ideas of, and initially I think we thought it might be more like an educational thing about fatbergs for kids, and then we kind of started meeting more people and talking about it, and it kind of like got ahead of us as an idea a little bit too quickly. Like it kind of captured the zeitgeist of fatbergs at the time. So I think that and then as kind of it consolidated and we did more R&D and worked with it and stuff, we sort of realized as we were building this world out and incorporating all of like the work and the collaborations with the scientists and stuff, is then there was this sort of moment when we were like, oh, this is about the climate crisis actually. And that kind of shifted. It's also interesting that early on we had some discussions with Thames Water, and it looked like that they might be interested in like a collaboration and stuff, and that all ended up fading, which is partly because we didn't have like the production support of how to deal with like a potential partnership like that. But I think that once we didn't have that attachment to like this more sort of corporate entity, I felt a little bit more creative freedom in the politics of the world that we were creating, and who kind of was in the fight with us, and like, you know, like all of that sort of stuff felt a little bit more free creatively, I guess. Yeah, so I don't know if that actually answers your question, Will. I do think that it feels more satisfying as a writer to have many elements to what you're writing about. So like, sure, our show's about the climate crisis, but it's definitely about fatbergs. It's also about like societal massive inequality, and how we can like resolve that, and how we can challenge. It's about revolution, it's about friendship, it's about all sorts of things. Gaina's show is about you know, young carers, but it's also about the climate crisis. It's also about girls in STEM staying in after year 9. And I think that actually most stories that stay with us, or even the Les Mis example that got used earlier, it's not just about one thing. It's always about, because life is like that, right? So I think that that's in the mix as well.
No, 100%. I mean, I just went to see Little Big Things the other day, and highly recommend it if you get a chance to see it. It's just in previews. And I think they've been very conscious in their marketing that if they advertise, you know, many people know the memoirs of the writer that it's based on, so they would know the subject matter already. But I think they're very conscious that if they say this is a musical about someone having life-changing injuries and sort of rehabilitating, becoming a wheelchair user, that doesn't on the packet sound like it's going to be a great night out, but it is. And no one would leave that show feeling like they've been remotely shortchanged. It's a wonderful emotional journey that you go on, and very much a sort of a happy good night out kind of musical. But with all of these things, it's how it's marketed, isn't it? And once you get them through the door, then as long as you've done your job well, it's going to be fine. But Tilly, I just had a quick question before we go back up to Will's next question. In terms of you mentioning Thames Water, there's something I wanted to ask all of you, and maybe Evelyn as well, in terms of the academic research, that are you finding having ecological climate crisis elements within the content, does that open up certain sponsorship or trust and foundation funding opportunities? Because certainly it should help an Arts Council England, and I imagine Creative Wales as well, that it should help project funding applications. But I'm curious, are there other sponsorship or trust and foundation income opportunities that are opening up because of that? Because surely so many organizations are needing to report that they're using their funding in this direction. Have any of you found that?
We had some initial interest with Thames Water, and they approached us, and we had some, actually they were really helpful in terms of R&D stuff. So we went on a tour of one of their sewage treatment plants, and we got to meet some workers who'd like, we went to the Hackney depot, and we got to see like the equipment they use to like break down the fatbergs, and we got to meet, you know. So I feel like from an early R&D creative point of view, it was great, and really, but it didn't end up materializing into anything more than that, or financial or otherwise. And we didn't know how to handle it, because like we are and even now, like I feel sometimes this in our industry, there's such a pressure on creatives to end up doing producing roles, and so it kind of fizzled, and then of course the pandemic happened. So I think that that really put a massive brakes on where we were hoping to go with everything. We didn't have any success in our R&D applications for Arts Council money, but I feel like that the project shifted focus kind of since we actually have been writing it, and that those were all R&D applications rather than actual making the show applications. And we haven't done a lot of research into alternative funding, I don't think. I know that the Royal Academy of Engineers kind of offer specific money for like science and climate change comms, and things like that, but sometimes it's hard to shoehorn a show into something like that. I don't know.
I mean, I just say after that, I mean, I suppose that these partnerships can provide access to resources and data and community networks that enhance the impact of our artistic work. So, I mean, even if essentially, ultimately, those partnerships didn't necessarily go anywhere, it still was mutually beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, totally. And also, we still have ongoing partnerships with the scientists that are working on the project, even though like our whole process is massively slowed because I'm not very well. But so we kind of have partnerships with those universities loosely, and you know, when it ends up getting to a certain degree, we have existing. So I think that yes, partnerships exist beyond just money as well.
I mean, that's the point. I mean, I think it's a mutually beneficial relationship where the arts can help translate scientific findings into relatable and emotionally resonant stories, while the science can provide the creative work with the depth and credibility it needs to engage audiences effectively.
Yeah, I think, you know, just picking up on a few of those points, I think, you know, from a collaboration point of view, especially when we did Eye of the Storm, it was at a time as well, Swansea University were looking to try and get more girls again into computer science and coding. So we started a relationship with Technocamps, which is basically a computer science sort of resource that goes into schools and teaches kids computer science and things. So they got involved with Eye of the Storm, and they created a computer program of how kids could actually create a coding program for renewable energy. So this was all linked with and we've kept working with them. They do all our productions now, whether it's, you know, a show about, I don't know, a kid poaching on the Margam estate. So they will do a computer coding program of that. The Arundel Star, which is about Italian immigrants, they'll do a computer coding program. So, and they love being involved because they come in at the very beginning when we're writing the script or whatever, and they are seeing it from their perspective. And I think what you were saying, Michael, about having scientists there, just, you know, because I think one of the issues with climate change is the communication of the science. And you hear on Radio 4 all the time, these scientists almost getting frustrated by the fact that they're saying, we're telling you this, you're not listening. So we're sort of like a vessel for their communication, I think is really important. And I think, you know, it's going back to, I think it was Finding Nemo. They used marine biologists to basically work with the animators. I thought that was fantastic because then they saw the characterizations of a clownfish, and all that is just makes that film, you know, so beautiful and so brilliant as a story, because those things are truthful. You know, the shark that, you know, has to stop eating, you know, eating people and things. I just love all that, and all those little things, those little elements come from working with people who know that stuff. And I think it just enriches the process. So the more people involved, you know, you don't want to be directing by committee. That's the last thing you want. But I think the more people that are involved, that are feeding into that story, making it as authentic and genuine as possible, the stronger that piece of theatre is going to be. So I was just thinking then about perhaps it's not to have a speed dating with venues, it's perhaps speed dating with universities and seeing if they've got a subject that they need to communicate and bring in artistic people in to create those shows. You know, perhaps it's that.
I can just pick up on that very specifically because I have run a couple of speed dating sessions trying to link up scientists and creatives, and they are the most fun, the most brilliant things, and everybody always comes out of them, both sides always come out of it thinking how inspiring and how cool that was. Science, I have a bit of a sort of pet theory that science is sort of all about stories. So like, it is stories, it's just which bits of knowledge we found out and use, and sort of everything that we do is always stories, because that's how we communicate and how we understand things as people. And scientists are always so keen to find people who can help them tell the bits of the stories that they've been working out in a sort of publicly accessible way. And I think I just love that. I love scientists and artists working together. I think it's the most amazing thing. If there's, do let me know if there's interest, you know, you or other people you know would be interested in that kind of stuff, because I always need to sort of find ways of running them, but I love running those sort of things, so I'm always happy to try and hook people up in that way where I can. I want to talk a bit about I want to come back to that kind of storytelling stuff. But I also just wanted to chip in on the funding stuff, particularly around the Arts Council fundraising. I'm feeling very cynical about Arts Council project grants at the moment, as I'm sure everybody is. And they, personally, I don't think that the subject of what you're writing about is really of any interest. I think I wouldn't put a lot of effort into trying to craft the 6 words that you're allowed to write about the actual show, bit of work that you're doing, and explaining how it's all brilliantly about climate. I think that there are definitely things in there, in the way that you apply for money, that can demonstrate how aligned with the principles you are. But it's not really, certainly environmentally, it's not really about content from the Arts Council. It's about practicalities and it's about process. What is really important to say on that is that absolutely the easiest and most effective way to make the process and practicality of your production more sustainable is to write about it. Because nobody doing anything practical in your show can ever argue when you're able to say the show is about the environment. Therefore, we have to make decisions that make it more sustainably made. So I think that is really worth bearing in mind. And certainly in when applying for money, when applying for R&D money, not getting too hung up on explaining how wonderfully worthy the content of the show is and how it's going to save the world because it's a musical about the climate. But sort of focusing on how the climate is relevant and important, and sustainability of making the show is relevant and important. Hopefully that's useful in thinking about applying for money from them. I also haven't really found anyone else who is actively looking to fund art about climate and environment. Specifically, I think there are no funders really out there who are not interested in doing things more sustainably. And so being able to demonstrate that is what you're doing, I think is useful in any funding, even though most of them don't make it quite as specific.
Can I just come in there? Because
yeah.
obviously we've got a different Arts Council in Wales.
Obviously, yeah.
So it is.
And I don't know about Scotland either. I'm very much
so it does feel different in Wales. I can say now we'll know what our revenue funded. We've just gone through an investment review, so we'll know that on the 27th of September. So I could be completely wrong, so who knows, eh? But I think there is a, within the applications that we put in, there is a whole section on how does your story, highlight the climate emergency that we're facing. So whether that's genuine or not, I don't know. But it's, there has to be an element of it. Most productions has to have that in. But yeah, I've never found any additional funding apart from the Arts Council.
Yet another example of how much more progressive Wales is. I wanted to sort of go, I'm aware we've only got 10 minutes. I just wanted to try and ask this question quite quickly, and then we'll do a quick summary on this. But I think this is quite a nice question to sort of end on. I don't think that the environment, sustainability, is an issue of sort of practicality. I think it's an issue of people and how people, the problem for people with climate change, with sustainability, with the climate crisis, the environmental crisis, is how that affects people. And it's how people will deal with that and process that and adapt to that. And I guess I think that this sort of comes back to how we tell stories about it. We're not trying to tell stories about trees or stories about rocks or physical, practical things. We're trying to tell stories about people and how people think about things. And I guess sort of particularly within that, an idea that I've heard people call putering before, and sort of what we're trying to show about how people adapt and how people change and how people sort of process things. Are sort of looking at what the future might look like, either as a sort of apocalyptic type, what we want to avoid, or as a sort of more positive, or what we want to sort of lean towards. And I guess what I'm hoping is that in the next 10 minutes, very briefly, some of you can say something a bit about sort of how you thought about the sort of physical, practical, environmental issues in terms of the people, the characters, and how that relates to what you're saying to people in the East. If anybody has anything to say quickly on that.
You go,
No.
Michael.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think, yeah, when grappling something as big as the climate crisis through theatre, it's always about kind of a personal narrative and relatable characters. So as storytellers, it's kind of our job to bring that human element front and center. And we do this by creating characters that feel like someone you might know, or even like you, you know. I mean, it could be, in our case, you know, a scientist passionate about making a difference, or a miner that's deeply connected to their community. It's characters that become our entry point into the climate crisis, I think. They give faces and voices to challenges, and also the hope that we're trying to convey, I think. So when audiences connect to these characters on a personal level, it's like a bridge to the ideas that we're trying to talk about. And so it makes it less abstract and more relatable. So suddenly it's not just a problem out there, it's something that affects people we care about. And that sort of emotional connection is kind of a powerful catalyst for empathy and action.
I think also with specifically our one, we spent a lot of time integrating the character arcs of the characters and like what their emotional kind of growth is throughout the play into the narrative of the play as well. So everything, and that's what drama is, right? It's action driven by characters. So it's not just these characters are experiencing stuff, it's that stuff is changing or stuff is happening because of decisions that they're making. So yeah, we get this scientist who like lives in a very like smooth, clean world up above, and then she gets thrust into this world below, which is chaotic and dirty and grimy, and she can't deal with it, but she finds connection with people that she's never had before. And we get this kind of really substantial growth with her, and it's through her understanding of community and connecting with people that enables her to eventually kind of come to the solution that solves the second tier crisis that they are able to solve within the show. So I think that you have to have it all interconnected the whole way through. And also in R1, the sort of obstacles that they face are people that represent different things. So we have a big baddie who's kind of like the warden general, who's a bit like a dictator or the head of the whole society. We have a kind of capitalist adventurist kind of character who's been like illegally mining the Fatberg and is just in it for profits, but he's sort of a former miner, so it's like a working class kind of person come good, like a Harry King, Terry Pratchett kind of vibe. And then we have like the union boss who's kind of been managing the workforce down below and is kind of trying to maintain the status quo. So we literally get these sort of representations of these societal figures that are all kind of existing in an ecosystem. And then it's kind of the friendship between the two main characters that kind of blows all of that out of the water and kind of forces these people to change. And it's a generational thing. Like our two main characters are youngish, like sort of like late 20s, but not quite like school age kids, because we wanted them to kind of have a PhD, or one of them to have a PhD and might be really specialized. So, but it's very much kind of shaking up the system in that way, but it's not, it's them doing it rather than the story kind of meaning that they end up there. I don't know if that probably makes sense. I'm going to pass it over to somebody else. I feel like I've talked a lot.
No, I suppose it's very similar. I suppose you just go, you know, through those characters, you know, with Operation Julie, it's great really, because you've got the police who are basically trying to, you know, they've got the surveillance on these chemists, and they are, you know, they're just a typical Thames Valley police really of the 1970s, who are basically, he says in it, you know, about like, we've got to stamp down on all these illegal festivals that are going in Windsor and Reading, you know, this is where anarchy starts. And, you know, it's about establishment. They basically epitomize the establishment, and all they wanted to do was just basically crack down on these people who had alternative ways of thinking of how the planet is going to succeed. And so you know it's great then, because you're way to go really on that sort of like goody baddie thing, you know. Yeah, so it's and I suppose it was a little bit taken from Life from Mars, you know. It's like I did delve deeply into all of those sort of things where you've got those 1970s police characters. Well, they're just a joy, aren't they, to write for, those lot, you know what I mean? It's like, so immediately you've got those people. And also in Operation Julie, where they lived in Tregaron, there was and basically I've just created this neighbor, this young girl, Megan, who just basically wants to get out of Tregaron, like nothing happens there. And Christine and her partner, Richard, have come to Tregaron. She's like, why have you come here, you know? And they're saying, this place is magical, you know? And she's like, are you kidding me? It's dead. And there were a lot of people in the audience from Tregaron sort of going, yeah, but it is, if you ever go there, it's an incredible place. It is like you're going into like some dingly dell that has just got this like weird vibe about it, you know. There's an energy there, you know. And I think it's if it's on your doorstep, you don't connect with it. And I think that was a lot to do with Operation Julie, is connecting with what's around you. You know, we have to connect with nature for us to actually want it to survive, I suppose. So yeah, so there's, I don't know if that answers the question. I mean, sorry.
No, mate. Evening. Well, I'm conscious we need to wrap up because we're coming to the end of our. All right, but do chip in if anything you'd like to say.
Agree with what you were saying, all of you, and I think there is lots of merit and possible funding in science communication, collaboration, translation. But my provocation would be, I don't think that's where the greatest creativity will come from, and I think that that maybe sometimes that's barking up a tree that is not, I don't know, where am I going with the tree metaphor? But anyway, yeah, my provocation would be that the human stories are interesting. I think again of that In the Heights, you know, which is a story about people in a place, but it's a heat wave. The grid goes down, so the context is interesting. And so to go back to what you were saying, I think people and how do we weather, what does that look like in performance seems most interesting to me.
I think essentially that goes back to what I was saying before. I mean, we need all these stories, no matter how much we collaborate and find funding for all these different things about climate. These stories need to be relatable, and it needs to be about, you know, the struggles and how our struggles are relatable, and how their choices become our choices, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. It will have to be relatable, and absolutely we need such a range of different stories in order for everybody to find something relatable in all sorts of different ways, and we all relate to all sorts of different things. So I think that's absolutely true. I'm going to try and wrap us up quickly. Gaynor, I was just thinking as you were talking before, this is slightly just to hijack the conversation. You come across a book called Manifesto by Dale Vince. He was the founder of Ecotricity, and he was a kind of new age traveler in the 80s, and has sort of moved through that to a sort of runs, you know, a multi-million-pound business now, like huge, you know, entrepreneurial spirit through that, and it just really made me think of that. And I thought maybe it's financing. Lexi and Raymond, I'm conscious that the rest of us have just sort of chatted away the whole time. If you guys have anything you'd like to say, we've got a couple of moments to chip in. If not, otherwise, I think we should wrap ourselves up. No pressure if you don't want to, of course. Give you a moment if you would. No pressure. I just want to say a quick thank you to all of you guys for joining us, for people for listening, for you guys for sharing your thoughts and your places. It's been a brilliant conversation. I won't do it all now, but I'm sure that James will be happy to pass on my email address if anybody wants to get in touch. I'm really happy for that, if anybody wants to talk about anything, scientists or anything else. And that goes for anybody else who was on the call earlier as well. But yeah, I think that's all to say. Just thank you for joining.